Hello and welcome everybody, and I'm Barbarian, and today we'll be talking about Victoria 3. To be more precise, today we'll be talking about an after-action report, so basically a report with images and text on what happened in a game of Victoria 3, written by Daniel Tollman, who is one of the developers, and Daniel Tollman was playing Japan. This was quite the interesting AAR. I haven't covered all of them, not even close. I think I covered one if I'm not mistaken here, and I didn't really want to cover any more because I said to myself, unless they have something that really makes it unique, that really makes it interesting, let's just skip over that. And the Japan one, of course, is very interesting for the purpose of it being an unrecognized nation, which is significantly different in Victoria 2 compared to Victoria 3. In Victoria 2, of course, you, at the very start, back then it was, of course, called uncivilized and worked very, very differently in terms of research, for example. It was a very, very boring time until you finally were able to join the normal mechanics of Victoria 2. Now, Victoria 3 does it differently, and it also works differently around the restoration of the Emperor. You're going to see this in this AAR, so if you're interested in those mechanics, and if you're interested in seeing some of the interest groups change their ideologies, at the very least one, but then the rest of course changes ideology via leader, then make sure to, basically just grab a cup of tea, maybe a cup of coffee, and listen to this AAR as we walk through it. In this video, we will be talking about, I think, roughly 60% of the AAR, and then tomorrow in a different video, we'll be talking about the rest of the AAR. I split it because it is just that long. I also made the images in general larger, that otherwise would be fairly small in this screen grab, so I hope that we can go through this bit by bit. Let's simply start out. Japan. Land of the rising sun, mighty and disconcertingly green. We want to fix the green. Green is for the shogunate, and we are not sticking with the shogunate. Oh, and also worth noting, we are very likely to scale like Japanese ownership of Hokkaido for release, and that's not in yet. I have to point out one more thing here, actually. There is a lot, actually, that passed in terms of development time and development investment, meaning that certain things, such as the new trade system, the new tariff system, I'm sure the new infrastructure system that is bound to people as well, none of these things are in. And with that in mind, don't expect to see them, but do of course expect to see the general workings of the political machine that are so important for the game. Now, also worth noting, we're very likely to scale back Japanese ownership of... Right, we've already read that. Looking at our capacities and the top info bar, things are pretty good. We've got lots to work with, especially financially. And you can see bureaucracy isn't that great, but authority is massive. And diplomacy, of course, also quite sizable. And then over here, 81,000 in surplus. So that is also something that you doubtlessly can invest. Right now, the GDP is measured by 19.2 million. Let's keep that number in mind, because we're going to be seeing the GDP develop, of course. A 31% literacy rate that fits fairly well with what we have seen. 10.2 is basically a fairly poor, I think, living standard. Not awful, but fairly poor nonetheless. And then there are a total of 31.9 million inhabitants. At this point, I don't think these sort of numbers are going to change too much between different iterations of the game, largely because the population is exactly what it is, right? And then there are 21 radicals in the country. That gang of 21 you gotta be watchful for. Now, what is that we think? Standard of living, 10 is really good for the early game. Yeah, this basically shows, I mean, it's good in the early game, but of course, ultimately, if you go into industrialization, it will be significantly better. This is fairly poor, but at the start of the game, you're doing quite well. Is 20 million a lot for Japan's size? So this is the GDP. Not really. Our economy is overall really quite underdeveloped, and this is the shogun. I don't think he'll be sticking around for too long. So here we have Ienari Tokugawa. He is basically full of traits. As you can see, I believe this means he's authority-oriented, he's a diplomat, he's a drunkard. I'm not sure what this means. It might mean that he lives in an excessive style, and this means that he's basically the authority personally. He's also the leader of the landowners. In this case, they are localized as shogunate, and as you can see, they are incredibly powerful, 37.5%, and they are also very happy. The shogunate and the samurai, and this is actually quite interesting to point out, they go hand in hand. I want you to keep an eye on this, because when we look at the shogunate, of course, those are the landowners. They play a very special role in Japan, as they were the ones that had to be kicked out if you want to reinstitute the emperor's power. The samurai are very interesting as well, because they are, of course, still your armed forces faction. And this is important to point out, because I think we see something here that is fairly unique. We're going to see it even more aggressively, ultimately, in the monks, so in the religious faction of Japan, but the samurai will be transforming from the samurai faction, which, is exactly what it sounds like, all the way to being the modern professional army of Japan. And I want to point this out because what we have with Japan is a very interesting and unique situation. In the other videos I was talking about very recently on or about the topic of, IGs and parties changing their preferences, changing their ideologies, changing their stances. And Japan is the biggest case for this happening. Once the shogunate is out, obviously they have to adapt to the new situation rather than, still clinging to the old power. The samurai must move on from hereditary rulers or hereditary champions, basically, all the way to an actual professional army. So an army that works exclusively for the emperor. And these sort of things occur here. You will see this with the monks in particular, again, because one of their ideology traits actually changes. But it's interesting to see because you don't regularly see such radical changes. When you look at, for example, Prussia stays pretty much where it is with the landowners, maybe with the industrialists, but at the end of the day, the landowners and the army hold the majority of the faction, with the Junkers and so on. And this is something where Japan has a very different gameplay experience, and I think where you can also see the change between Victoria 2 Japan, where you were just waiting, maybe you were waging some wars to, get progress so that you can become civilized. But in general, you can't enact anything that you can do here in Victoria 3 in this context. And I really like this because Japan, of course, is one of those fun nations, I think, especially if you're a new player in any Paradox game that has Japan. Japan is a good idea because Japan basically is fairly isolated. There's not much going on around it, and you can focus on yourself and learning the basics. So again, I do want to pinpoint this because Japan seems quite interesting. And I think his shogunate and samurai lackeys need to be put in their place as well. Primary goal for this AAR, at least until we achieve it, is an early restoration. I don't say Meiji restoration because I am hoping to achieve this goal before the reign of that particular emperor. So basically, they keep track of the emperors in the back of the game system and then push them in depending on when you restore the emperorship if you were to do it. So, I mentioned it in a lot of ways. We have a lot to work with. In another sense, we don't. Most of our states are struggling with market access due to a lack of infrastructure. This is also a very unique situation because regularly when you have market access, they decided against making it so that your market in general has issues with access. This is something that shouldn't be the case. You would always be interested in fixing it. But in Japan, and I believe in Russia with Siberia in particular as well, that is a bit different. So here is, where you can also learn about the mechanics around market access, as they don't really are that prevalent, that important in other states, because regularly you will have market access in all states no matter what. This means that the more we build, the more we dig into our already limited capacity to distribute goods around the market. And the economy, or for that matter our society, is not going places unless we can start building. We're going to need trains. Now, we're quite a long way from trains, and we're not good at research. Being unrecognized, as well as having very harsh laws forbidding dissent, are really hurting our research rate. Plus, we have universities. So let's take a look at this right here. We obviously want to go to the railways, and that is quite a bit off indeed. I think decrees are going to be really important early on. I'm thinking that in order to rush trains, we should not simply research the prerequisite techs. We're going to start with academia, build some universities to boost our research rate, and only then do we go trains. Right, and then here we have Paul Depré coming in with a response here as well. Can't wait to see realism modders add 1,000 new techs. Jokes on them, QA helped make sure the system would actually support that semi-easily. If you recall, the way the tech tree works is that it's auto-created. So you just add which tech is dependent on which tech, and then the tree will actually just auto-generate this, making it very easy to have effectively infinite techs, because the tree will just arrange itself. I've decided to spend all of my authority on road maintenance. This will have to do until we invent trains. Of course, this is the best way to approach it. You can also see here the amount of states that are present within Japan, and you will maybe notice, if you've played Victoria 2, that there's not that big a difference between Victoria 3 and Victoria 2. They really, and I think fundamentally if you look at Korea as well, they really stuck to the core idea, which is why I just want to reiterate, I do think it would be quite nice, but ultimately, and I do want to stress that as well, that is really only if you want to paint the map in a very particular way. It would have been nice if we had been able, outside of just the actual market ports, right? So the trade ports, had we been able to take individual provinces, but of course, it is restricted to states as is right now. And you can see there's not that big a difference, meaning Japan can't really be separated in a much more meaningful way than it could have been in Victoria 2. In the meantime, it lets us build things without incurrent market access penalties, right? Since he now has the market access from the Rhodes Decree that will cost him authority, but we talked about this before, he has so much authority, he might as well use it, right? Since he has now done this means that he can expand before he even has railroads, because all of a sudden, of course, he has much more access as is. Wait, how cheap is a decree? Not inexpensive, but Japan's autocratic laws give it a lot of authority to work with. Looking at my market, things are pretty good. I expect that as we ramp up construction, we'll need a lot more iron and wood, so these should be priority industries. As you can see right here, artillery, of course, is sought after. I believe this might be opium, right? Then we got fruit, also very expensive. We got well-cut meat, so I assume this is good meat. It's a luxury good as well as you can see from the purple background right here. And here come then the issues. So this is an industry good. I am, of course, talking about iron and timber, but services are a fundamental good that your citizens need, and if they are expensive, that means the standard of living of your citizens goes down, and that can be a revolution. I really like the way that you can look at this. What you can see here is that these max out at plus 50%. Since then, of course, they've changed it that you max out at plus 75%, meaning it can be more extreme. But yeah, this was in the old state. The effect ultimately is the same. If you have anything that is plus 50%, it's going to be insanely expensive, and people are going to be very unhappy. Now I like this actually, buy order 0, I have to assume it's like 0 point something, right? And you just have none of this in your market, which is why this is so expensive. Quite funny. People want a greater variety of food sources as well, but I don't think that's a high priority because, of course, that is for a higher standard of living. Why is there so much artillery that is desired? Because we're consuming it through our military buildings. Obviously, that is a production method that you can change, and the cost goes entirely to you, because ultimately you are the only person actually buying it. Yeah, as you can see right here, not enough artillery is being created. First up, I'm going to expand my construction sector. We should also work out where we want to go legally. It seems like moving from our economic system from traditionalism to agrarianism would be both popular and profitable. Agrarianism would allow us to subsidize a lot more industries if we need to, and that allows aristocrats to contribute to the investment pool. And right now, Japan only really has aristocrats. Obviously, there is literally nobody that is a capitalist, and traditionalism doesn't really have an investment pool as I understand it, but agrarianism very much does, so that is quite interesting indeed. Are those sell orders of dye domestic or international? It's all domestic. I don't think he explains it here properly, but Japan, of course, is very isolated, so I would assume that basically most market activity is indeed domestic. And with that, I'm going to unpause. So, we want to churn out a lot of wood. There's two ways we can go about that. Build a whole lot of logging camps. This will employ more people, and we have a lot of peasants living on subsistence farms. Use more advanced production methods, building tooling workshops to support that. The downside here is that tools take wood as an input good, meaning you need more wood to produce more wood, and that could be troublesome. I can't say for sure if I'm right, and I'm not going to do a lot of digging to determine this, but I think that option 1 might be best for my economy right now. Of course, we're still going to need tools because we also want to expand our iron mines. As you can see, there is a very clear line here. Economically, industrially, you can build very different nations. They can be, the ownership model can be very different, but fundamentally, no matter what you do, as long as you want to optimize who creates how many goods per worker, you really do need tools. You can't get around that, although of course he is currently delaying this right here. Now that I have a larger construction industry, the price of wood has skyrocketed. Better get shopping that wood. Remember, this is something that is essentially completely absent in Victoria 2. Yes, you build, of course, but the building in Victoria 2 is created by you simply supplying the materials, and then it gets built. In this one, you employ people in the construction industry. That construction industry then uses actual resources, and that is how you build. In this case, an actual expansion doesn't just mean that you need to be prepared to, be in a situation where you can supply the newly built buildings. You need the supply to even build those buildings. I love that so much. I think the construction sector, and I've seen a lot of very good feedback on that, I think, and I don't want to wash that feedback away. Ultimately, some of the feedback basically is it's a bit weird that you have a full domestic and national level of construction that you can utilize, and I agree, I absolutely do. But man, even the way it is, I completely love this. You can see right here, an unrecognized country that has so much potential as Japan is still in this really interesting and this fascinating situation where they are meeting their own limits. The limit in this case of their actual resource production of timber and wood and so on. Here you can see the price. Yep, very expensive, 4.4k. Wait a minute. I think this is the output of a building. But as you can see, it is very, very high. It is much, much higher now than it was right here. Will taking peasants off of farms lead to shortages of things? The most important thing the peasants do is produce wheat, which is currently quite cheap. Yeah, so you can basically ignore this. Although, of course, if the price of wheat rises, that's how you get a revolution. Eventually, we might become concerned about food production, but for now, we're good. We just passed agrarianism. We did it in under a year because it had a lot of support from powerful government IGs. This means that we lose the bureaucracy cost bonus from traditionalism, so we're down to only a small bureaucracy surplus. This was pretty much all of our current government is good for. I think it's time for a change. And this is where it gets a bit weird. Well, not weird, but it's just it doesn't feel right. I think it's time for some new ideas, but also some older ones. The shogun appoints the monks and the intelligentsia to government, disfavoring the samurai. So I think, I'm not actually sure here. He could theoretically just have a government like this. I have to assume. So we look at this, right? Disfavoring the samurai, completely fair. You can do that. I just would find it odd if he removed the shogunate, because at that point the shogun removed the shogunate of which he is the leader, and obviously that will cut into your government legitimacy. That is how that works, as far as I understand it, that if your leader has a certain government faction, for example, the Pope is a devout leader, and the devout aren't in government, or the shogun's landowners aren't in government, then you're going to take a massive, massive hit to your legitimacy, but still, fundamentally, it feels weird. I think right now he only kicked out the samurai, left in the shogunate, so like, that weird stuff didn't happen. I just wanted to point it out because, yeah, again, quite odd. Nonetheless, what I do want to point out here, and I think that is very important, is the fact that the Buddhist monks, just take a look at this, right? I believe this means faith. I believe this means the hierarchy, of course, between man and woman, and I believe this means the Buddhist faith, right? Keep this in mind, because this is the only case that I know of where we are going to a change, not just of the leader and their ideology. You can see he's a pacifist, you can see he is an abolitionist, if I'm not mistaken, or at least he wants to get rid of serfdom. Either way, we're looking at these, and these leaders change regularly. Every 10 years is roughly the standard, right? But you don't regularly see these ideologies change. You will see them change in this Japanese playthrough, so let's keep that in mind. People like the monarchy. This is just a presidential republic. Nobody wants to get rid of it, except, I believe, the intelligentsia. It's funny that that is even an option, so pushing this through. You can click the button, but it won't go well. The new government, unfortunately, doesn't have a lot of strength to pass new laws right now, so we'll just be content to have kicked the samurai out. Very satisfying to watch the price of wood drop as I churn out logging camps. Yeah, look at that. The price has gone down, and there you go. All of a sudden, the price went down significantly. Very, very nice. This is just, I believe, the revenue, right? So the actual units sold and for how much they sold in total, rather than the market price. It would be quite crazy if the market price changed from 22, to 7,500. So I think this is just the building's output screen. Just a few more camps and we'll switch over to iron. We just got a journal entry. If we can keep the shogunate's IG out of power for 10 years, we can really start making some progress. Oh, and by out of power, I mean not just out of government. We need to greatly reduce their political clout. Best way to do that is to change the makeup of our economy and society so that they cease to be a relevant force. So what he showcases here, and I think this is very important to understand, Victoria 3 in its core is a society builder. Much like Victoria 2 and Victoria 1 wanted to be that very society builder. Victoria 3 goes much, much harder. Whereas previously it was quite nebulous, I think, quite difficult to ascertain what exactly you need to do to reach which exact goal, which is why most of the time when people have radical government changes, in Victoria 2, they kind of just let the rebels do it, again, in most cases. In this case here, you can change basically the makeup of society, the power of society, change who owns the means of production, and all of a sudden you might be able to actually kick them out of the establishment without them ever rebelling. This is the goal here, right? You kick them out of government, you suppress them, and then you take away their clout by weakening the pops that actually support them, meaning you make it so that other people own, for example, the important businesses. You can do that by getting new businesses and having other people own them, for example, industrialists of certain industries. You could make it in a way where you simply change, the means of production, you change who owns whatever the landowners own, or you could do it in a way where you could simply go and sort of bankrupt the industries of the landowners. And, for example, if they own everything that produces wheat, just make sure that, you get rid of the subsistence farms and you create new farms that are then run by aristocrats, by capitalists, by people that are not just generic landowners. I think the aristocrats actually are landowners, but that is the goal, and that is so interesting because you will, for years to come, you will exclusively be focusing on your own economy, on your own country. It's very exciting to me that you have so much going on there, and the Japan game, again, is a very good example of this, because the shift from the shogunate is so important if you want to proceed when it comes to being a good power. Best way to do that is to change the makeup of our economy and society. But a little bit of coercion could help too. Are you disbanding the army? I like to avoid that this time. So disbanding the army, in this case, the landowners have the armed forces impact because, of course, the armed forces are peasant levies, which the landowners technically own. We might have overdone the iron mine expansion. Iron is now dirt cheap, meaning the people who are mining it aren't being paid very well. Another way to think of it, let's use more iron. I guess you can make artillery out of iron. And the army is complaining that cannons are expensive. Good news, we have academia, so that is the tech. Time to queue up some universities. Universities will fix our research speed issue, allowing us to get trains faster. Employing academics will also increase the power of the intelligentsia, who will be vital to reforming Japanese society. So right now, he is strengthening the people that will allow him to go on. If he wanted to stay as the shogunate, he would have to take actions that maintain the landowner power even as you industrialize. He's not doing that, of course, but that is basically something that you could be doing. Building more arms industries made artillery cheaper, which lessens the burden on government expenses. We still have a very large budget surplus. Money, good. I'm going to use part of it to increase government wages to maximum. This will increase the wealth of academics and bureaucrats and anyone else who works directly under the purview of government funded except for the military. It'll also make the intelligentsia happy. This will raise their standard of living, it will raise their clout. Such an easy and important move. If you starve them out, on the other hand, of course the landowners would keep their power. This will also weaken the shogunate, exactly. With all these academics running around, we are burning through a lot of paper and we should build some paper mills. I just love that they're using paper. You use paper in your bureaucracy as well, which is why China, of course, the Great Qing, they are such a huge paper consumer. I gotta tell you, PDXCon is near, right? But I gotta tell you, man, I am looking forward to actually playing this game. I can't wait to do some playthroughs of essentially sitting down and just forming my society. I'm crazy. I'm crazy for this stuff. I'm so looking forward. And I hate that we only have the AARs right now. Eventually, of course, in the next couple of weeks, I hope, as August rolls in, we're going to see some live streams. But yeah, I would love to play this game, my god. Anyway, you had enough wood, right? Plenty. We're researching railways, so we now have made it by not just simply rushing the tech, but by rather rushing a tech that then allows us to go for that tech. And of course, by actually having more and more iron, and of course timber, we're now in a position where we also can build the railways which are without overstretching us. So there's two preparation channels here. It is the channel of the academia that strengthens also the intelligentsia, and it is the channel of the working class that is being built up as they produce iron and wood. This would be a good time to start making some preparatory industries. To make the trains run on time, we're going to need three things we currently don't have: coal, steel, and engines. Coal can be found in the ground under Kyushu. Steel is made out of iron primarily, and thankfully we have a lot of iron, and engines need steel. Kind of interesting when you think that since Japan is isolationist, the concept of railroad reaching you feels kind of odd. To be fair, I'm a nigh omniscient being who knows what a train is. For now, these new coal mines and steel mills will be very unprofitable. We can't use them for anything, really. He just builds them, of course, in preparation. Is coal not consumed by pops for the heating purposes? It is, but wood is preferred. I like this a lot. Again, we talked about heating in the past. It won't happen in this way, but obviously it would be so nice if in India, for example, heating was just less of a consumed good than it is, or consumed service than it is in other countries like northern Japan, for example. Still quite nice that they, of course, have preferences. Shockingly, nobody wants to work in the coal mine to extract useless black rocks. They wouldn't get any payment because the building basically couldn't pay them. Raising wages and building universities has bumped up the intelligentsia, up from barely above marginalized to actually quite relevant. You can see there at 12.2%. Though the monks hold the majority of power in the country. Again, keep an eye on the Buddhist monks. Daniel, how do Buddhist monks differ from the Catholic Church ideology? One main difference is that they are less keen on the concept of theocracy. I think it's time to abolish peasant levies. Japan ought to have a professional army. It will disempower the shogunate, but boost the samurai, since officers will be pulled from their ranks. So, basically, you get rid of the shogunate here, then you strengthen the professional army and actually move them into this location where they can assist the emperor rather than the shogunate. I also do want to point out, I believe the being keen on theocracy or not being keen on it stems from this particular one that we saw earlier as well, the Buddhist ideology, but even that is something that won't stick around for long. Despite their massive change in fortune since the start of the game, the shogunate isn't especially unhappy. So the shogunate is losing clout, they're being suppressed. I think that is what that means at the very least. You see a cloud literally going down. I think they're being suppressed. And they're in the opposition. We knew that already. Government legitimacy because of that is very low. And again, it just feels really weird now that the shogun is still the shogun, but he's like, I govern without the shogunate. There's a lot of sort of roleplay brain, headcanon that you have to develop. And I think that's counterintuitive. This should be a very intuitive action. It should be something where you look at it and go, oh yeah, of course, the shogunate is losing power. Obviously, the shogunate is being ousted, but it happens before the shogun is ousted. It feels odd. Anyway, let's take a look at the total approval here. It's kept at 5, but they have 12 because they love the monarchy, autocracy, state religion, hereditary bureaucrats, isolationism, land-based taxation, outlawed dissent, legal guardianship, and no social security. It can easily be said, if you want to proceed into a more liberal state, into a state where the shogunate is no more, then you definitely want to get rid of the hereditary bureaucrats. You might want to get rid of the state religion, although I don't see why I would see that. I think this is actually this is not a shogunate trait or a shogunate ideology that makes them like this. I believe this is simply something because of their leader. Then right here we have isolationism. Obviously you want to get rid of that as well as land-based taxation. If you just wanted to be a very aggressive emperor, you probably just want to get rid of the hereditary bureaucrats and isolationism, since that probably gives power to the shogunate, if I had to guess. The landowners stand to get more clout from that, right? But you definitely want to keep the monarchy, the autocracy, state religion and such. Yeah, I ultimately, there's a lot here that you can play with, that you can take away, and they will still be happy. Quite interesting, actually. That, honestly, yeah, somebody brings that up as well. I do think it would be nice if a faction reacted, A, to their leader kicking them out of government, while he is the leader of the state, but also, I think, if they lost a lot of clout rapidly, they should also be reacting. Yes, of course, it changes because of real-life circumstances, but ultimately, at the end of the day, I don't know, it does feel weird when you go from 40% to like 20% in no time whatsoever, and it's obviously a suppression effort, on a social and economic level by the player. I feel like they should react to that. The shogunate disapproves of change from peasant levies to professional army. You can see a -5, and yet it doesn't actually change all that much. Shogunate approves of the recent change from traditionalism to agrarianism. So they did like that. I assume because they are basically agrarian, right? They are the landowners, and then in opposition gives a -1. Let's take a look at this. They don't like the move away from peasant levies, but they're happy enough with the general state of the country that they aren't going to kick up a fuss. Should IGs get angrier because they lose power, though? This is something that what I just was basically talking about. They lost the modifier from being kicked out of government already. They've started political movement, but, well, they are highly ignorable. Their objections have been noted. Yeah, look at that. They don't really care for that, and now I'm looking at this. This was this change, right? And they're trying to get rid of the peasant levy now, making it so that, of course, they're going against that. They're happy about the agrarianism, not so much with the professional army. They want to get rid, or they want to preserve the peasant levy indeed. But as you can see, if you have 39 million people or 30 million people living in your country, 147,000 in this faction, it doesn't really matter that much. Not to mention, they aren't radical at all. It is trains time. I do feel like a powerful IG loses clout, they should get mad about it. Should they be mad about the government, at the government though? Sure, the shogun removed them from power, but their decline in fortunes has been due to general socio-economic factors that can't be levied at the feet of the government apparatus. See, I kind of disagree with this. I don't necessarily disagree in terms of gameplay. You will, if you change your laws, that will then lead to different socio-economic situations that are worse for one IG. They will be mad at that law, so this is already accounted for. But realistically speaking, when I, for example, very much look at Germany, even in the modern day, I think Germany is a very risk-averse country, and I think Germany is a country that looks at the state and says the state ought to take care of society. That's the way it is. There is a certain degree of collectivism in there, and I think that, of course, there's a spectrum when it comes to individualism and collectivism. The truth about this, ultimately, is that many interest groups in real life, to stick with the gamified term there, but many interest groups, many stakeholders, as they're generally called, do expect the state to take care of their needs, to make sure that they are in a position where they are quite as well off as they were yesterday. I think a certain blame in a collectivist country, not that collectivism as a spirit of the nation, so to speak, is emulated in Victoria 3, but I don't think it's unrealistic. Certainly there are countries that say, listen, you're the creator of your own fortune, and if you fail, then you fail. But there are also many countries, especially if they are as institutional as the shogunate, of course, is in shogunate Japan, where they probably should say, hey, wait a minute, what is happening here? Aren't we supposed to be running the show? I do feel like, I like that you need to move against the shogunate the way you do, and I do like that you are changing them bit by bit by bit as you're changing your factories and such. I definitely do agree that I find it a bit odd when you look at the situation of, we are running this show, also we're worse off every day. you know, I feel at some point it feels like they would say, wait a minute, something's not checking out here. Anyway, that is just one of the additional thoughts that I had there. Appointed bureaucrats could be the death blow, I bet, to the shogunate. I would love to pass that law, but the monks hate it. Our first railway line stretches across the western coast of Kyushu. Look at that. Goes from Kita-Kyushu to Fukuoka, Kunamoto, and Kagoshima. Here you can see the actual buildings. They use the general East Asia building set as it exists in the game. I like that this looks so fairly sparsely populated. You have obviously the big city of Fukuoka right here, but then you look at, you know, these smaller areas. It's very, very cute, and I would love to see a Japan, you know, in the end game. So towards the even modern population numbers, that would be quite crazy. I can only imagine that these cities become massive, truly massive. But yeah, what a beautiful map indeed. Now that there's a railway, there's a demand for trains. With demand for trains, there's a need for steel. The industry is growing, and we're employing Japan's first capitalists. They have actually done it. It is the year 1842, so only 6 years in, but in all fairness, he's still very far away from a full restoration. I believe, if I'm not mistaken here, he finishes the restoration in the 50s, which for a good player, I think is to be expected. You can easily pull it off in Victoria 2 as well, of course, as Japan, very easily, in fact. But here you have a bit more to do than you do in Victoria 2 civilizing it. It's, again, very arcadey process because uncivilized nations were very much an afterthought, whereas unrecognized nations in Victoria 3 are a prime candidate to be played and be a part of the show. Now, the new leader of the monks doesn't have such a strong stance on bureaucracy. This would really start to annoy the shogunate, but we might actually have a chance to pass appointed bureaucrats. Here they are, the first Japanese capitalists. Good for them. They're running the motor industries in Shikoku. OMG. If you were, of course, not trying to min-max, Daniel is a very min-max heavy player. I think he likes just playing with the numbers. Very much respectable. But if you're not min-maxing this, you're looking at the first capitalist probably coming up in the 60s, the 70s, right? And at that point, man, you would have to undergo the Americans actually opening your market, actually trying to push through their journals, right, towards Commodore Perry and such. I would be very interested in how the capitalist development goes in that circumstance. Anyway, they're doing rather well for themselves, making engines in the motor industries. And oh, I seriously underestimated how much steel we'd need. I'll just fix that ASAP. Steel shortage. We actually have an input goods shortage. That's really bad. How bad is it? The trains can't function without it. I was wondering why paper was suddenly so expensive, but then I realized that I just did a major reform of my government administrations, and they eat more paper. We're going to need a lot more paper. As you can see, the question always is more. And this was, of course, also the question in Victoria Revolutions, in Ricky, and in Victoria too, that you always needed to expand, because otherwise you would risk falling behind, both on a society level, and people would suddenly drop off a very deep cliff when it comes to their wealth, but also on a competitive level. Anyway, look at this. Alright, we can use this. The bureaucratic struggle event in Kansai. Our efforts to pass the appointed bureaucrats law have run into several classic bureaucratic hurdles. Debates rage around such lofty matters as the correct shape of filing cabinets. Good, fast, cheap. You get 2. Right. We will spare no expense. I assume cheap falls out here and it's good and fast. This will take as long as it takes. Good and cheap. And let's just get it over with. Fast and cheap, but very much not good. As you can see right here, this is not art that may strike you as very Japanese, but what many people don't know actually is that the Japanese are, of course, a Turkic people. No, I'm bullshitting. Listen, I think this is just a classic case. We talked about this in the past, that you can't cover a global game with enough art assets to actually have everybody have a unique circumstance. Very unfortunate, of course. Again, like, every time you see it, I do think it will go against your immersion. And this game, with all of its events and with the game, with the way it depicts these events, is very much of immersion heavy. It wants you to take a look at what you're doing, which people you're harming, and so on. But yeah, you might look at these and go like, that's not Japan, like, I don't care about this. I think it's ultimately a negative, yeah. Oh, we just got a big boost to bureaucracy due to the aforementioned improvements to the administration. I will use that to improve the state of education in Japan. I have religious schools, though, so it will empower the monks. Not a huge fan of that, but literacy will ultimately help more than it hurts. Are private or public schools possible? Possible, yes, but likely no. Yeah, you can see right here most... there's barely anybody that is in favor of it, and that, of course, is just not good enough. So, the samurai are actually more powerful than when I kicked them out of government because of the professional army. Would adding them back in be a bad idea? I don't particularly want the government in the hands of the old elite. We're making a new elite after all. We've got the line infantry now as well. This is really good for us, despite not really having intention of going to war. We had a surplus of small arms. Plus, there will be more officers employed versus soldiers, which will generally make Pops a little richer. Though the samurai will once again be empowered. Yeah, look at that. If you take a good look at this, of course, you can see the decreased employment. You see officers and servicemen changing right there, but you can see in general, of course, the changes in particular to the good consumption. Yeah, they're consuming 110 more. It's just good to keep your economy running, especially if the small arms production is in the hands of the capitalists, then it's even better for the purposes of this playthrough. Then here we have meritocracy, same image, sad. A new guard of intelligentsia bureaucrats are outshining the shogunate in every aspect of their work. This is a very encouraging omen for the efficacy of appointed bureaucrats. They think that just because they were born with a silver spoon in their mouth that they deserve the most important positions. But their privilege and entitlement makes them lazy, nepotistic and arrogant. We, by contrast, have had to work for all we have, and there are real consequences for failure. Advancement should be based only on merit, not on birth. Clearly, appointed bureaucrats is the correct policy. The shogunate, I assume this gives you progress in passing your law, right? The shogunate have done a shoddy job or encouraged the intelligentsia to join the civil service. So it seems like you can either choose to progress the law, or to suppress the shogunate, or to encourage the intelligentsia. That is how I would read this. What do you think? I don't know what's happening here, and I don't want to know. There are two things that I want to say here, right? There are two things here. First of all, it's super cool that you got some stuff going on there. That's fun. I see the Revolutionary East India Company. So there's a revolution internally. And then I assume the other flags are puppets of the East India Company that chose to side with either the revolution or with the originals. I think that flags as occupation are a nice idea, but this kind of shows why it might not be that great. I can't read any of this. I can see the EIC, and I think this is the revolutionary flag. But this, I mean, this is like overlapping. I think there's 3 total flags in here. It's this one with the bird, it's this one with these symbols, and then it's this one with the sun. It's just not good. There has to be a middle ground in here. I don't know, I just gotta tell you. I absolutely love what they have done with the map, but the occupation stuff, this ain't it. In my opinion. Central America predictably didn't last so long. I think we're going to take a look at the new Guatemala, I think it's Guatemala anyway, AAR as well, after the Japanese one. But yeah, look at that. The Central American Federation, of course, fell apart. Are there any other places that are quite interesting? Prussia is consolidating pretty quickly. To use private ownership PMs, you typically need to improve your base PM. So for iron mines, I need more from picks and shovels to atmospheric engine pumps. So basically, you use advanced tech. That advanced tech is implied to use different sources of money because it needs more money at once because you need to buy the machinery and such, which then in turns implies that you get different folks in charge. If I recall the dev diaries correctly, this means, for example, that you would go from small-time shopkeepers to capitalists, where shopkeepers might be emerging into capitalists, right? So that is the loop. You need to have better tech that requires more investment, and then you get the capitalists that make it so that you get better ownership that is maybe more aligned with what you want to push through. I'll give that a go, see how it pans out. So he changes tech so that he can then change ownership, and with that, again, change the power situation in Japan. We are at almost 28 million GDP, up almost 10 million. Yeah, it changed significantly. There was a lot of industrialization already, no doubt. We finally got appointed bureaucrats. We should really start to see the intelligentsia gaining power now. So, there was a little situation in Hokkaido. A few years ago, there was a minor gold rush, which meant a bunch of pops rushed over there to seek their fortunes. It didn't take long for the gold to dry up, meaning that those pops are now unemployed and angry, causing turmoil in the state. Thankfully, I have a way to deal with that. I love this. What do you want to say? I think this is great. This is really good. I absolutely love seeing the situation where you have these sort of small stories, be it migration because of suppression, be it, for example, a gold rush, and that changes fundamentally how you interact with that region and with the situation at large. Very, very big fan. Obviously, you can simply suppress it here. Minus 50% state penalties from turmoil, and the turmoil mortality goes up. Certainly won't make Hokkaido an interesting state for migration, I think. But yeah, this is Very interesting. I love that sort of approach. We're getting close to kicking the shogun out of power. Just a few more years. Why can't they get jobs or return to subsistence farms? They're in Hokkaido. There are not a lot of jobs. They can become subsistence farmers, but they aren't exactly thrilled about giving up their luxurious gold miner lifestyle. So, you're Japan, island nation, where are the boats? Boats move people to and from other countries. We don't really believe in that. No need to import pops and materials. Japan has all it needs at home. Right, at least for these very early years. Japan, of course, was very isolationist. I wish he showed the isolationist, doctrine off here, but yeah, sadly he doesn't do that. Told you, boats were a mistake. The Shikoku cyclone. A cyclone has hit the state of Shikoku from the sea, tearing through homes and people alike. It destroyed our home and wrecked my fishing boat. My family might be safe, but how am I going to feed them? A tragedy, but what can be done? Or we should put some more money into the relief. Again, very European. Yeah, again, the art style, I think I've covered that enough. Very close to the opening stage of restoration. After that, I'll call it a night. Japan starts getting more interesting once you do the restoration. Speaking of which, the Komei Restoration. The shogunate has fallen from power and Emperor Komei has restored the political primacy of the monarchy. This momentous occasion marks the end of centuries of shogunate rule in Japan and heralds a new era of modernization and reform. The emperor must choose his political allies carefully. The former shogun bows with respect and shame as he hands over his residence and seat of power, the mighty Edo castle, to the restored emperor. Renovations are set to begin at once. The old castle to be replaced by a glorious imperial palace. Though the exterior will appear much the same as the former imperial residence in Kyoto, the emperor plans to combine Japan's rich decorative traditions with strange Western fashions, a metaphor, perhaps, for the future shape of Japan. Industrial might will see us through. We must look to the intellectuals, right? So, whatever you want to choose, the industrialists or intellectuals, who you want to side with. I wonder, I feel like this might be what determines the faction of the emperor. Which faction the first emperor sides with. Red Japan is back. And there you have it, Japan is back all of a sudden. Let's compare this. Population of 42 million. We started here with 31 million. So that is 11 million up. That is crazy. Up from a literacy of 31 or 32% to 56%. That is wild. That's pretty crazy. The standard of living overall is lower, but we are supporting more people, so it makes sense that it goes a bit lower. GDP 31.6 million. Up from 19.2 million. So, quite the increase here as well. The state religion is Mahayana Buddhism. Primary culture is Japan, and it has a bunch of arable land. And it looks like... Look at that. So, obviously, we're still isolationists, but it looks like he sided here with the intelligentsia. Right? We must look to the intellectuals. I think this basically forms a new government and decides on whose leader he is. I believe that he has become an intellectual by doing this, basically. Now, this was the very first one. We're going to go through this now, and then the rest of the AAR, which is 3 more pages, but we can do that tomorrow, so don't worry about it too much. So, let's take a look at that. As you can see, he has restored Red Japan. We have seen the massive numbers. And now at the second part of this video, we're basically going to take a look at this, and after that, there will be, for tomorrow's video, there will be 3 more entries just for this AAR. Trust me, there's a lot happening, and we are simply going to do basically half of it now in this video, and then in the next one, we're going to do the second half of the AAR. So, we are right here. So, when we left off, we kicked off the restoration, the Komei Restoration, given that Meiji is not yet reigning, and returned Japan to a glorious red. We've got 3 journal entries to complete in order to resolve the restoration, so this seems to be like the Tanzimat reforms in the Ottoman Empire, where you need to do it, except, of course, if you don't do them in the Ottoman Empire, you basically crumble and fall apart. In this one, I assume it's a forward-facing one, where it's less about stopping failure and instead achieving success. We need to retire the samurai and modernize the military. This one we'll complete very shortly, since we've been keeping up with our military tech and PM usage anyway. Now we need also to urbanize. A lot more of our states need larger urban centers. Another condition is that most of our states need railways, but we have those already. This one is by far the most difficult. We need to end our economic isolation and become a recognized power. So this is the big one. What I like about this restoration is that he was so insanely busy setting himself up, right, in the shogunate period itself already. Different from Victoria 2, where you do fairly little in that period that is exciting. In Victoria 3, you're looking at a situation where even playing an unrecognized power will have you do so much. You can push yourself into so many different directions, and he did this successfully. And yet, He's unrecognized. He's looking in a situation where he still is the samurai. He's looking in a situation where he's not yet industrialized. This rapid industrialization that Japan underwent in this period is something that they are depicting in such a much better way than they ever did in the past. Big fan of this journal system, of this journal entry right here. I think it really shows the benefits of the journal system in Victoria 3. Now, currently nothing, but they're still marginalized. Right now, there's essentially no support whatsoever for reforming our trade policy. So as I said, this is the most difficult one. 23% approve of this, and then nobody else wants anything else. Yeah, nobody wants to leave isolationism, but without isolationism, or with isolationism, of course, you can't really emerge on the world stage. My personal goal of empowering the industrialists is to some extent the prerequisite for completing my journal entries, since the industrialists will certainly support a move away from isolation. Who are these squabbling 23%ers who don't like to import anything? You can look at this right here. The support for isolation and opposition to alternatives comes both from the landowners, formerly the shogunate, but the shogun is permanently removed from power, and the peasantry. So the rural folk and the landowners are supporting isolationism directly, meaning if you were to move away from isolationism into any direction, these two would try to then form a movement to stop you from doing it. So a movement to preserve isolationism. I would also quite like to shift the state religion from Buddhism to Shinto, but right now we have the state religion law, which means that doing so would make most of our population discriminated. So I think I'll hold off on that until we liberalize our religious law a little. It's part of a slow nationwide process, but I've transitioned more of my logging camps to private ownership by enabling sawmills, a more advanced production method. This means I made more wood, consume more tools, employ more capitalists and machinists, and employ less laborers and shopkeepers, meaning the petite bourgeoisie grows weaker. The rural folk, or at the very least, what faction would the laborers be in? Probably largely in none, because they are illiterate and won't join political factions, but the machinists and the capitalists sound like industrialists to me, and with that, all of a sudden, you have a very strong base for the industrialists. These logging camps are doing pretty well. So, number 77 of logging camps in the country, number 340 in the world. Okay, that's not that great, but they are doing well, as you can see right here, because the weekly balance is 5.27k in the plus. Yeah, the prices here, none of these are extreme. Both of these are fairly in the center, both the tools and the timber, but they are making good progress, and of course, urbanization is proceeding as well. I really love the way that they implement urbanization here, where you can actually tell that the trees disappear. We covered that in a different video as well. But also, of course, that, you know, this actually will benefit the urbanization of the state, and with that, what you're looking at with the urban hubs and the journal progress. There's always a demand for wood. You can never have enough, especially in a closed economy where you can't just import more. He finally says this, that I brought up earlier, where since he has isolationism, it can't actually be requests on the market. This came at the very start, I think, of this video. You can't have requests for the market that are international, because this is isolationism. It's all domestic, right? And obviously he would like to change that long term. Oh, would you say Japan is proto-industrial yet? Perhaps proto-industrial, yeah, okay, so we made it to that point. Next step is getting coal in more factories. Right now, I'm building some more silk plantations. The price has become quite high since we started employing capitalists. Wealthier pops means more demand for luxuries. Next step is getting coal in more factories. We'll certainly be wanting more coal, yes. But first, bye-bye, samurai. The fall of the samurai. Japan has succeeded in reforming the armed forces and putting an end to the backward system of feudalism. The armed forces warrior castes seemingly no longer have a place within our modernizing society. This event, I'm really mad that we didn't see the run-up, that we didn't see the details of what the event actually does, because the way it feels to me is that this might change the ideology of the samurai. It renames them to armed forces. But sadly, we will never be able to tell. I don't actually know whether it changes anything. Japan has succeeded, right? The shogun commanded the loyalty of the daimyo, who in turn relied on their samurai to help them enforce their rule over the unserved peasantry. This was the basis of Japanese feudalism, now a relic of the past. There are those still loyal to samurai ideals, the codes and virtues known as Bushido, and that legacy will surely endure. But the samurai have fallen, and we will not see their like again. Let them keep their status of officers and nobles, or the era of samurai is over. I just want to know what these do, okay? I really want to know what these do. We're going to let the remnants of the old elite keep their officer positions though. Antagonizing the army just doesn't seem like a great idea. Downside is that further military innovation is going to be a lot more expensive. So we know at least this makes innovation, be it in laws maybe, be it in tech, more expensive, maybe in production methods? More expensive, but What exactly that means, I don't know. So that is 1 down, 2 to go. I'm going to do something possibly dangerous. The monks are really powerful and I'm not a fan of that. And as I said before, having state religion makes switching to Shinto a bad idea currently. So I'm going to defy the monks and try and possibly fail to secularize a little. Okay, so revolution progress began almost instantly. That's fine, maybe. It's only the landowners, the peasantry and the monks. So together the landowners and the peasantry already were 23%. Is it like half the country, right? That's quite heavy. Maybe try and remove the monks from bureaucracy first instead. It works the other way around, unfortunately, right? Change secularism production method to secular administration. You're not allowed to have enacted state religion in church and state. Predicted impact, right? So before he can remove them from their jobs, which would make them poorer, which would make them less influential, he would have to change the law. And to do that, he needs to fight the presently strong monks. If I can pass this law, the monks will lose a lot of their power. It seems like a good time to raise military wages, just in case. The army is very loyal right now, at least. There's a lot of demand for meat, yet thinking long term, I don't want to use up too much of my arable land. My solution? Whaling. Classic. Are there limits on what regions can develop a whaling industry? Only a handful of states in the game are able to develop a whaling industry. Hokkaido is one of them. Oh, but before I do that, I just realized we could be building a lot faster. You know what? When the gold rush happened, he should have definitely pushed the miners, or the former miners, into the whaling industry. Yeah, he should have done that earlier. I'm moving my construction camps to iron frame buildings, which will consume a whole lot more iron and tools. I should make some more of those. Budget took a massive hit due to the newly increased costs of these goods, which should hopefully be rectified shortly. My budget doubled when I finished a large batch of iron mines. Government consumption of goods is a really major economic impact factor. Yeah, definitely is. Are taxes keeping up? How do you profit off the iron mines? It's not so much that I profit directly from the iron mines, though I tax their dividends and the income of their employees. It's more that I directly buy their iron, and if that's expensive, then I pay a lot more, so he basically just made it cheaper for himself. The taxes are fine, not something I'm looking to change right now. Map updates are terribly dangerous in terms of CTDs, so crash to desktop. That breaks saves though. Anyway, I tried restarting and the game crashes after a couple of weeks. That means this particular session is over. With any luck, CTD fixes will let the run continue another time. They did. Fun fact, my whaling industries were flooding the Japanese market with worthless oil. Yeah, going from nightly to stable is probably going to cause more problems than it fixes. Once I actually find a use for oil, they'll be extremely profitable. For now, the oil is worthless, and I only care about the whale meat production. Can use the whale oil to fuel cars. You can use whale oil for any purpose that regular oil is also used for. So yeah, you can power a diesel engine with whales. Okay. I actually don't know if Japan is scripted to have a native source of oil. We might actually have to rely on whales if we don't manage to end our isolation by the time it becomes relevant. Never mind. There is oil in Chubu. Can Pops buy oil for heating even if the oil drilling tech isn't unlocked? They can. Heating needs aren't a huge portion of Pop expenditure though. I'm assuming oil whale will be nothing compared to a 19 tails oil rig in Texas or something. Yeah, you just can't squeeze very much oil out of whales. Oil rigs give you vastly more oil. And this brings us to the end of today's Japan coverage. As you can see, the country changed significantly, and I hope that, as you can see right here, after these two entries that we read, we are in the year 1853. What does that mean? That means that in 1853, between 1836 and 1853, so a bit less than 20 years, right? 1856 would be the 20 years. We saw a reformation, or rather a restoration. Kicked out the shogunate, but the restoration is far from finished, and that is what I love. Instead of saying, okay, the shogunate is out, it's over, now we're good, we're done, you are actually looking at a country that is constantly forming. Previously, we're looking at the shogunate, and of course its power being quite undeniably insane. You can't really go against it. All of a sudden, they were worked down, the socioeconomic impact changed, whether they should have been less happy about that, be that as it may, right? But as it stands, this is a massive reform, and 20 years passed, which means 20% of the actual playtime in Victoria 3 passed, and yet there's still so much more to do before Japan can even reasonably look outside of its own borders, before it can look at colonies, before it can look at invasions, at trade partners, at hegemonies and such. And I love that. This is exactly what I was looking for. He had so much to do in a period that in Victoria 2, for example, you would have basically nothing to do. I will be back tomorrow with another video covering Japan. There is a lot going on here, trust me. Keep in mind, for example, the whole religious issue and the idea of changing ideologies, in this case of the monk faction. You will be seeing the change there, but you will also be seeing many other massive changes. I'm happy to cover that tomorrow as well. I hope that you will be there also. So I will see you then. For now, later, alligator.